Hey, welcome back to Gold's Garage. So this video is the second video about Blakely's 340 Mopar engine. Yeah, you heard that right. It's a Mopar, and you know, if you got tired of looking at watching me build small block Chevs, this will be a nice change for you. Made the first video a couple days ago. Mike was here with me and helping the teardown started. I've kind of finished the teardown. Lots to tell you about it. Today. I don't have Alec today. He's away skiing right now for the weekend. He doesn't care about me right now. He's just having fun. So I'm doing this myself. I got the camera set up. I don't normally do that, but I thought it was important to get a follow-up out there based on the information I gave on the first video. So normally you'd think you'd be nervous about, you know, I never did a Dodge Mopar engine. They're different. And you know, you could get yourself in trouble. Well, I'm not worried because I got a YouTube channel with a whole bunch of really smart people watching it and willing to take the time and share their knowledge and experience and expertise. In this case, Mopar guys. So we started on Sunday and Mike was here for the initial part of the teardown. We published that video and right off the bat, comments came in. You got something wrong, guys, and it's a good thing for YouTube because we wouldn't have known it, at least not at that point anyway. So thank you very much. When I say I'm learning from you guys too, I'm not kidding. This is a really good example of that. So, and as we get going, please remember to like and subscribe. I think you're going to find this an interesting video. I got a few things to talk to you about today. One is now that I've done lots of Pontiacs, lots of Chevs, big blocks, small blocks, etc. And now Dodge. What are the similarities and differences between Dodges, Pontiacs, and Chevs? And so it all makes sense because all these engines, the 340, started off to be a 273, which was developed in the early 50s. The small block Chev started off to be a 265, which was developed in the early 50s. And the Pontiac engine was actually a 326, started off in the early 50s. And so I mentioned before, you know, these guys snooped on each other, the OEMs, the engineering departments. They were all in a race to come up with a good overhead valve V8 engine. And they didn't just snoop, they actually stole engineers from each other. And man, is that ever evident when you start taking them apart, because there's so much here. This engine is kind of a hybrid of a Pontiac, a Chev, and then there are a bunch of unique things about it that are Dodge only that I don't see in any other engine that I've done anyway. And I'm going to get into the details of that as I go forward. So because I'm by myself, I just downloading at the end of the day. Mike called me, asked me how it's going. I said, well, you know what, I'll make a video and that'll be my report to you. So as I mentioned, I guess the first thing, when we finished the first video, we had the partial tear down done. We had taken one bean bearing cap, one rod cap. We had one piston out, looked at it, and had kind of a summary view of it. And we made up some assumptions that turned out not to be right. So if you saw when we finished the video, it was getting pretty cluttered. So the first thing that I do before I go to the next step is organize and clean, because what do I like on my bench when I start? Nothing. And that's a good way to get started and stay that way. If I stay organized, I don't get confused. So that's the first thing I did. And then I carried on, and what I've got done so far, I've taken every main bearing clearance, every rod bearing clearance, every piston clearance. I know about everything about this engine that I need to know so we can decide what to do next. But if you watch the first video, we're going to fess up here where we went wrong. So I took the cylinder head off, put it in the corner. You can't see it right now, it's not in the camera, but measured the deck height of the piston and the head gasket thickness. So the deck height was basically 0 of the piston. The head gasket was 45 thou. So if that would have been a small block Chev, we'd have 45 thou quench. Mike did the calculation, came out to about 10-to-1 compression. Man, we're good to go. So we published that, and someone came back and said, you better check that out, because on a Dodge, deck height, zero deck height isn't good enough. The dome of the piston, and what I'll do, because I can't move the camera around, the camera's fixed, I'm going to take a bunch of pictures, and Mike will put them up as screenshots to kind of show what I'm talking about. But on a Dodge, the original pistons actually had a dome that reached into the combustion chamber of the cylinder head, because the cylinder head was not, the combustion chamber of the cylinder head, the quench area, or the quench pad, is not flush. It's actually recessed about 40 thou. I've measured it. So in order to get, if you want 40 thou quench, you got to either deck the block or use a piston. The original pistons, and the pistons that we used, I can show you that. The pistons that are in it, these are actually Silverlight pistons. They have 4 valve reliefs, and the dome was basically, the quench pad was basically flush with the top of the block, and that's not good enough, because there's 40 thou more clearance in the cylinder head, which doesn't just destroy your quench, but reduces your compression ratio. So for that reason, we've got to rethink this. Now, for a few other reasons, we're going to probably rethink the pistons anyways. Now, I want to talk about the differences and similarities between Dodge, Ford, and Chev, and it's pretty interesting. But about the engine itself. So now that it's apart, as I told Mike, and I think I mentioned in the first video, it's in pretty good shape. The camshaft we took out in the first video. All the lifters are in good condition. It's looks like it's a Dodge, what they call direct connection back then. That was a big deal with Mopar camshafts, and they called it a purple camshaft. I think it's 280. Anyway, that cam was in good shape, and Mike had seen this engine running, but it had been stored for something like 20 years. So for that reason, you know, you'd be nervous about it. But anyway, it was all in good condition. So, and as I kept going, the rings and the bearings, or the bearings, the rod and main bearings are all in good shape. The cylinder walls are in good shape. I took one piston out on the first video, and we had a little bit difficulty getting it out. What I should have done is taken time. There's no ridge on this cylinder at all, but there was a little bit of carbon, and that makes it hard to get your piston out. So if you take a little bit of emery cloth and clean that carbon off, the other 7 pistons came out pretty easy. So they're all out. The cylinder bores are in good shape. You could actually, we're not going to, but you could actually put this engine back together and it would run just fine. But we're not going to. Mike wants to get this right for Blakely. So something that I noticed that we have to look at is when I measure the connecting rod clearances, and haven't done it yet, but when I go in, I'm going to make an Excel spreadsheet, which will be part of this video. The crankshaft got changed about 1 thou from one end to the other in terms of dimension, and the clearance, of course, went down by 1 thou. I think it got smaller as it got to the back. Crankshaft got smaller and the clearance got bigger. We started off with just over 1 thou clearance and over about 2.5 thou by the time we got to the back. The main bearings were kind of all between 2 and 3 thou, but some 2.2 and some 3. The rear main was 3.5, which is fine. However, the pistons are 4.5 to 5 thou clearance, and they're Silverlight pistons. These are not the OEM pistons. This engine has been rebuilt before. These are Silverlight pistons. Mike looked up the number. It's board 30 over, by the way. But for a hyper-eutectic piston, that's quite a bit of clearance. Now, I don't see any evidence that it's caused any problems. There's no scuffing on the cylinder walls or on the pistons. But typically, a hyper-eutectic piston, you're talking about 2 thou or so, 2.5. Whereas with a forged piston, 4.5 or 5 thou would be okay. So we just found that out and just talked to Mike on his way home from work. So we got to think that through. So what we thought we had before people that commented on my YouTube channel after the first video was 10-to-1 compression is more like about 9.3, and we got more like probably 70 thou or something of quench. So we're going to do something about that, and we'll provide that information in a future video. So pistons have a dome, didn't realize that. The cylinder heads are unique. We will actually I'll put some screenshots up of the casting numbers. They're 1970s cylinder heads. That's the other thing. We looked at the cylinder heads. For some reason, they're about 60 cc's. We did the calculation. As soon as I saw the comment on YouTube, I got my burette out. I measured it. They're 70 cc's. So obviously there goes the compression ratio, right? So that's kind of where we were basically off in that and the quench part. So we'll fix all that. So on my notes, I made some notes about what's different and what's the same about a Chev and a Pontiac and a Dodge. So these guys, they didn't just steal the engineer. They brought the drawings with them when they came, because there's so much similarity, it's uncanny. So in the case of what's common between this engine, the Mopar engine, and the Pontiac, the oiling, it's main priority oiling. So the oiling goes to the crankshaft first, from a tunnel in the block, goes to the crankshaft first, and then up to the camshaft. Whereas in the Chevrolet, it goes down from a tunnel in the top to the camshaft first, then it goes to the crankshafts. So, sorry about that. So the timing cover setup on these engines, the timing cover, the way the cam is retained, the drive for the fuel pump, the thrust for the fuel pump, all that stuff, the way the water pump fits on it, I think they just took the drawing from Pontiac and put it on a Dodge. It's almost exactly the same thing. The firing order, they all got the same firing order. And in the case of a Chevrolet and a Dodge, they turn the same way. A Pontiac turns backwards. Pontiac rotation, it turns backwards. Now, big difference in Pontiacs is there's no small block and big block Pontiac. The 326 Pontiac and the 455 Pontiac have the same block. So they just kept enlarging things from the inside out. There's no difference between the big block and small block. The thrust bearing location between the Pontiac and the Dodge is both in the middle. Both Pontiac and Dodges come with non-adjustable rocker arms. Chevrolet from the beginning, 1955, and the 265 come out, had adjustable rocker arms, and they pretty much always been that way. Whereas the Pontiac and the Dodge are the same. So how about this? Talk about bore and stroke. So the bore of a Chevrolet is 4-inch. The Dodge is 4.1. The stroke of a Chevrolet is 3.48. The Dodge is 3.31. I'll put this in the spreadsheet as well. The main bearing differences are sizes are almost the same. The Dodge is 2.5 main bearing. The Chevrolet is 2.45. The rod bearings are 2.125, 2 and an 8, where Chev's 2.100. So the other thing on the bottom, the registry between this block, the block configuration is a hybrid, but it looks more like a Chevrolet, but the oiling is more like a Pontiac. The registry, the way the main bearings fit into there's a registry here, so the main bearing caps fit into a recess. Pontiacs don't have that. They use a little dowel instead to align the main bearing caps, whereas the Dodge and the Chevrolets have it that way. Combustion chambers. So what's unique about a Dodge? There's some things, they stole the engineers, but they didn't get the guy that designed the heads, because cylinder heads on the Dodge are unique. First of all, they got shaft rockers, whereas on the Pontiac and Chevrolet, they have individual towers with rocker arm studs. So shaft rockers is actually a nice thing. As I mentioned, the Dodge ones are not adjustable. However, you can buy them adjustable in the 360. This is a 340. The 360s, I think, came with adjustable. The piston dome volume in the Dodge is unique. The cylinder head oiling is very, very unique, and I'm going to point to it, but it's the best I can do right now. There is actually a hole that lines up on the cylinder head with the block, and I'm pointing at it here. So on the 2468 side, it's between 6 and 8, and on the other side is between 1 and 3. There's a drilled hole coming from the camshaft bearing feeding the rocker arm shaft, and then the rocker arm shaft feeds oil all the way along. So I'll take some pictures after, and hopefully Mike can put a screenshot up and show you that. So that's kind of some of the common similarities and differences between them. This kind of a hybrid. Dodge was on their own with the cylinder heads, that's for sure. They look more like Pontiacs, I guess, if anything, but they sure don't look like Chevrolets, and the way they calculated that was different. So that's about that. So we will continue to make videos as we get going. We have to, I think tomorrow I'm going to take the cylinder heads to Bill Little, and he's going to do his thing on the cylinder heads. And then we got to decide what we're going to do with this block. We got some work to do, and we don't have pistons, all that kind of stuff. So we'll keep you up to date on that. The crankshaft is in good condition. I mentioned in the first part, it's 10 under, and on the rods and main bearings, they're actually in good shape. The crankshaft's in good shape. It does not need to be turned. It can be used just the way it is, and we got to get the bearing clearances corrected, as I mentioned. We'll probably have to do on the rod bearings, use 2 sets of rod bearings to get that clearance lined up. We're a little bit too tight at one end. We're only got a thou clearance at one end. At the other end, we got over 2 thou, so it's okay, but we'll probably do something about that. And we'll keep you posted. So hope you found that interesting. Please like and subscribe. For what it's worth, Nick's Garage, and I'm pretty sure most people that watch my channel also watch Nick's Garage. He's in Canada as well. He's about 6 or 8 hours east of here in Montreal, or north of Montreal. So coincidentally, the very next day after we did the teardown video, Nick did a teardown with his customer. And obviously the videos are made long before they get published, so I didn't know he was doing one, and he didn't know I was doing, but pretty similar. So if you're interested in that, Nick is Dodge Mopar aficionado, so you might be interested in watching his videos as well, and follow along, and hopefully you'll find it interesting, and we're going to learn with you. Thanks for all your advice, all those that gave me comments and got me on the right path, and we're going to go from there. Thanks for watching Gold's Garage.